Hi friends, this is Ashley Latecki Ellenboss with Sky House Herb School and Apothecary, and today we'll be looking at catnip and some of its very interesting properties, including its effects on consciousness, sexual behavior, and some recent studies showing its effect on morphine dependence. So we'll be looking at all of those today. Before we dive into that, I wanted to mention that I have an upcoming herbal apprenticeship course that's starting in January. So if you've been listening to my podcasts and videos and you want to learn more about herbal medicine, you can study with me for a year. The next class starts in January of 2021, and classes will be held on Saturday mornings. Well, I guess that depends on where you live, but Saturdays from 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I would love to have you study with me. In that course, we cover botany, we look at making herbal medicines, we talk about plant energetics, we talk about body systems, and it's a very comprehensive general overview of the study of herbal medicine. And by the end, my hope is that you're able to use herbs for yourself, for your family, maybe even recommend herbal supplements and herbal remedies to friends and family. So that will be starting. The early bird special, which is on right now, will end on November 15th. So if you want to grab a discounted price for the full course or for the payment plan option, you can register at www.skyhouseherbs.com. Click on the Year 1 Herbal Foundations course. We're also going to be running a Kickstarter program through my husband's website and through his YouTube channel called Nightlight Astrology. So if you're not following my husband, Achyuta Bhavadas, you can follow him at Nightlight Astrology, and his Kickstarter will be offering a special rate for the Year 1 Herbal Apprenticeship. So it'll be a very deep discount, and that will launch in November. So if you're able to pay up front for the course, it will be $1,000. So that saves you about it saves you about $900 from the full price, and it saves you $700 from the early bird full price or full payment option. But if you can't pay out front, then you can pay $150 a month, which is the early bird rate until November 15th if you sign up before then. I also offer need-based tuition options. So if you can't afford $150 a month for a year, then you can apply, and we don't turn anyone away. So if you can afford, there's a range that you can choose between, and you can study with me for a year. And we just want to make sure that keeping things affordable is a huge part of both my mission and my husband's mission. So please take advantage of that if you want to study. So now let's talk about catnip. So catnip is in the mint family, and it's native. Actually, it grows in most continents throughout the world. But the species that we're going to be talking about specifically is Nepeta cataria. And this particular species is native to Northern Europe, Central Asia, actually Eastern Europe as well, and it's been naturalized in in North America, in New Zealand, in Australia, across Northern Europe as well. But there's 75 different species of of Nepeta. And there's a lot of historical use of these different species in the Middle Eastern forms of medicine, as well as in Asian and Chinese medicine. So let's talk a little bit about catnip and human consciousness, and also cat consciousness, because they're actually interesting to take a look at together. So a lot of you probably know about catnip and how it affects cats. I mean, this is something that, there's all sorts of, TikTok and YouTube videos on watching cats go crazy for catnip. And the interesting thing is that in cats' brains, the way that catnip works is catnip has this chemical called spironolactone. And what it does is it binds to these olfactory bulbs in the cat's nose, and it sends a signal all the way up to the brain. It affects the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and then it triggers the pituitary gland, which works on the dopamine receptors, and it's a dopamine agonist. So it produces dopamine in the brain of cats and also humans, which is interesting. But in cats specifically, this compound creates, it's very similar to pheromones found in cats. So what happens when cats get a hold of catnip is that they get a sexual arousal response. And so it's a very euphoric response. And they also, they also sort of hallucinate a little bit. So there's this sort of like, kind of really, euphoric, high, hallucinatory state of being that the cats go into. But one thing that I thought was really interesting is that only 70 to 80% of cats actually have this gene that has them respond to catnip in this way. So if you have a cat where they just look at catnip and they're like, whatever, what do you want me to do with this? They might just not have that gene. So, you can't know what you're going to get unless you know the lineage of your cats to know if their parents were catnip lovers or not. So one thing that I wanted to talk about is that, we know that in humans, humans have a dopaminergic response to catnip as well. And while it doesn't have this sort of pheromone component like it does in the olfactory bulbs of cats, it does play a role, and it does have an effect on on dopamine in the brain. And so one thing that they did, there was a study that they performed on mice. They took male mice and they gave them, I think it was like 10% of their food was catnip, which is a high amount. That would take a lot. That'd be a lot of catnip for a person to eat 10% of their daily food intake as catnip. But anyway, what they did is they were trying to see, would this have an effect on their sexual behavior? And what they found was that after feeding on the leaves for about 4 hours, they found that the mice that ate the catnip enhanced food versus the just regular food that they were eating, that the ones with the enhanced catnip food actually had increased penile erection, and they had improved sexual behavior. And I don't know exactly what an improved sexual behavior is specifically, but they found that the mice responded in that way to catnip. Now, one thing that I thought was very, very interesting was that we know that in humans, catnip has such a long history of use, that we know that catnip is a nervous system relaxant, which means it takes stress levels and anxiety levels down. And so we can postulate that part of one of the reasons why catnip might also be used to enhance human libido is because it does work on dopamine and because it is a relaxant. And for a lot of people, we know that stress can be one of the major issues for people that are struggling with issues with intimacy or performance. And so, often people look towards a lot of herbs that are maybe high in testosterone, or herbs that are have a direct effect on blood flow regulation. But I would propose that something like catnip, which is just a gentle herb and not benign by any means, but very gentle, might be a really good herb for people to take, especially during times of high stress, if they're feeling like their libido is being depleted or diminished in some way. Dopamine is sometimes called the pleasure neurotransmitter. And so if we can take an herb that will increase this, we might also notice that not only might we find increased pleasure through sexual practices, but just pleasure in life, just being able to find more satisfaction in the life that we're living. So I would consider using it for those reasons, and just again for taking stress levels down. Now, there was an English physician who His name is Sydenham. He lived between the years of 1624 and 1689. He was a well-known English physician. He was a follower of the Hippocratic method of medicine. And he had a really interesting quote about catnip that I wanted to share with you. He said, "Catnip recalls the exorbitant and deserting spirits to their proper places." It recalls the exorbitant and deserting spirits to their proper places. And I feel like this is such a great description of catnip medicine, because sometimes we get very dispersed and our energies go in a lot of different places. And so catnip is a remedy that helps to bring everything back home, back to its place, back to its rightful place. So if you're feeling like that, in that way, this again might be another medicine that you could add as just a daily tea. And I'll talk about at the end how to take this herb. But I thought that was a really nice quote to talk about the power of catnip. Now, how about the topic of consciousness in terms of the hallucinogenic properties of this plant? Well, this is something really interesting. So I was doing some research on it because I was thinking to myself, if cats have this hallucinogenic effect, could humans have it? So in doing all of my research and looking through papers, I came across one paper that was written in 1969 from the Journal of American Medicine. And this paper was actually, it was triggered because in 1969, as a lot of us know what was going on in the United States, sort of the whole hippie revolution, and this was when LSD was very popular and marijuana was very popular. And so physicians were being told of people having people experiencing hallucinogenic effects from catnip. But as I looked into it, this was from smoking catnip. And so this paper showed 4 cases of younger adults between the ages of 20 and 23 who had had previous experience smoking marijuana and taking psychedelics, smoking catnip, and then their experiences of it. So really, it was not a clinical trial that was done on it. It was just taking information from clients that they had interviewed. And so this is what they reported. These 4 cases all had very similar reports after smoking catnip, that it increased their flow of thoughts. It created a euphoric sense of feeling or being. For all 4 of them, it created a deeper fascination with music, and they were able to kind of have an almost sort of multi-sensory experience of music. It, however, did not increase appetite as marijuana often did. One reported a headache and malaise the next day after smoking it. Now, they didn't go into how much was smoked or any of that, so I don't know. I'm not suggesting that you smoke catnip. That is not, but what I wanted to bring this up just because, however you can bring these compounds into your body, I think they do have, it can have a similar effect. We know that when you ingest, cannabis, whether you ingest it through your mouth orally, you make a tea out of it, or whether you smoke it, that those compounds are still taken in by the body and they still do have this effect. So my thinking was that I would not be surprised if in drinking higher amounts of catnip tea that they may have, and in fact, have a slightly altering way of working with the body, much like the plant does have in cats. So this is just a hypothesis. I wasn't able to find any papers that showed this to be true. So this is just something that I was thinking about as I was researching this topic. I did want to mention that I've seen in my clinical practice this herb really, really help people that have experienced, I would say, kind of dysphoria in their mental state. And so in terms of how it affects consciousness, at least in how I've seen it work in my clients, I wanted to share a few cases. So I had a 67-year-old male client who came to me because he was feeling quite crabby. He just said, I'm just kind of moody and I get agitated. I know I'm under a lot of stress with being, sort of isolated at home. And I just need something to help me with my moodiness and crabbiness. And so I recommended catnip to him because it is a mood booster. And, it's really good for people that tend to keep all of their emotions bottled up and then they just sort of explode. And this is something that Matthew Wood taught me. So it's a specific remedy for that kind of everything's bottled up and then they just have like an emotional outburst. And that was definitely what was happening with this client. So I started him on 1 dropper full of catnip tincture 3 times a day. And after a month and a half, when I did my follow-up with him, he said, I'm feeling a lot better. He's like, but here's the thing. My wife told me, boy, you're really not as crabby and moody as you used to be. And he said, and if my wife notices it, that's a good thing. He's like, then it's true. And he said, so, I was feeling better, but when she said that, I knew that, what? Yeah, this is definitely working. So he's going to continue on it. I also have had a few clients between the ages of 27 to 29, and this is kind of interesting. I feel like it's a good Saturn return medicine. So for those of you who know a little bit about astrology, your Saturn return is when Saturn in your wherever Saturn is in your birth chart, you have a return of Saturn to that same place. And so this usually happens for people between the ages of 28, 29, 30, sometimes 27. It kind of depends on your chart. But these female clients were having symptoms of just feeling like this sort of repressed anger, this sort of feeling bottled up, feeling like they needed to break through something, feeling tense, feeling anxious, and, kind of having outbursts of behavioral outbursts or having verbal outbursts that were not helpful. And so for these clients, I also recommended catnip. And sure enough, all of them noticed that they also had a similar feeling where it was almost like instead of the lid blowing off and them doing things that were a little bit reckless or saying things that they regretted later, it was that the lid of the pot just could slowly let off steam here and there. So they were less likely to have that big, blowout and which would have consequences. So I'm starting to use it more for that pattern as well in my practice. And then the last thing I wanted to say was on the topic of morphine, and this is something that really hits close to home for me personally. A few years ago, I lost my cousin due to a heroin overdose, and it was really devastating and is devastating for our family. And so when I came across this article, it was from the, let's see, here it was. It was from the Journal of Ethnopharmacology in 2017. And what they found was that pre-treatment with an ethanolic extract of Nepeta menthiodase, which is a variety that's spelled MENTHOIDES, extract attenuated the development of chronic morphine dependence in mice. So, so they did what they did is they did a trial. There was a few studies that quoted this, but they found that when they gave morphine-treated mice this catnip extract, that it actually decreased the dependence that they had on morphine. So they actually reached for less and less morphine. It also increased the morphine analgesia. So basically, one of the things it did is it increased the effect that the morphine had on sort of that numbing quality with less of a dose. So they also found that there was a study done in the 2016 Iranian Journal of Basic Medical Sciences. They did more studies, and they found that one of the mechanisms by which this happens is that there is a reduction of brain nitric oxide and malondialdehyde, which is a compound. It reduced both brain nitric acid, and the malondialdehyde overproduction in the brain. And so what they are trying to do now is that they're trying to do more studies on catnip to use it as an agonist to basically prevent and to decrease morphine addiction. And so I was thinking about this from a very practical point of view, and just thinking about all of the people that, get hooked onto things like opioids and morphine and heroin. And, if they could drink catnip tea, that might lessen the risk of overdose. I was also thinking to myself that if someone was going to be going into surgery, and let's say they knew that they were going to be prescribed painkillers, and most likely an morphine-based painkiller, that they could also drink catnip tea in addition to taking any painkillers to decrease the likelihood of becoming addicted and becoming dependent on it. So, any life that we can save from any life that we can save from an overdose of these very, very potent pharmaceuticals, I think is worth it. And so I'd love to see more research done on catnip for this particular reason. But I think that it would be something that is it's a very, very safe herb. So it's something that I was even thinking, like, I had this dream. I was like, I wonder what would happen if we could bring it into high schools, right? In areas where maybe there is a higher risk, or maybe hot spots where there's a lot of opioid use, that maybe in the methadone clinics or in high schools we could just serve catnip tea and just use it as a little bit of a buffer and a preventative. And also because it's so good at reducing depression and anxiety, it might in itself also help some of the underlying issues that cause people to become addicted in the first place. So, I think catnip has a huge potential in this area. So how do we use catnip? Well, Madame Grieve, who is has a well-loved, documented repertoire of herbal medicines and uses of herbal medicine. You can look up Grieve's Herbal if you would like to learn more about her work. She recommends using it as a juice. And so this is something that also Ellingwood and Felter, the eclectic herbalists, would use. They would use catnip as a juice, and it was used in infant colic. It was also used in anxiety and nervous debility and nervous tension. So if you can get fresh catnip, you can juice it and drink the juice daily. For those of us who can't find it fresh, then you can make it as a tea. And so it's a pretty strong taste. I would recommend about 1 teaspoon of dried catnip to about 1 cup of hot water. Cover it, let it steep for about 10 minutes, and then drink it. And you can modify that amount as needed. And that's the dosage I would recommend to have that nervous system relaxant, and to also enhance libido, and to have this sort of mild consciousness shifting activity. And then as a tincture, you can take 1 to 2 droppers full 2 to 3 times a day. And that would just depend on how sensitive you are to plants. And so, when you work with an herbalist, they'll give you a specific dosage, but this is just a more general dosage. And if you want to work with this plant more as a spirit herb, then you can just simply take 3 drops about 3 times a day and just work with it energetically on a more subtle level. And, that might just sort of be enough for you if you want to just sort of work on that idea of, not blowing your lid when you get frustrated or angry, and just sort of working on a more subtle level with this plant. So I hope this has been helpful and maybe has sparked some ideas for you. I'd love to hear how you use catnip, and any stories you have associated with catnip and your cats. If you want to post pictures of your cats, that would be really fun to see, cats high on catnip, or maybe yourself after a cup, just sort of laid back in your chair with a dreamy look in your eyes. I'd love to see all of that. So thank you again for joining. I hope to see you all again on my channel, and maybe joining me in January to study herbs in more depth. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.